Okay, so we are in Psalm 91. Can anybody tell me about one of the names or attributes that we have learned about God so far? So what is the I am who I am, the Yahweh, the Jehovah? What practical implications does that name have for me?
That he's always been.
He's always been. So he's the first cause. All right. People want to get back to causes. Well, he's telling you in no uncertain terms, he is the first cause. And that's helpful. What are some of the other things that we've learned about God? We've basically focused on the Psalms in that regards. And, that's really not fair. You guys don't have a book. So I would have a difficult time remembering everything without a book. The importance of God's name, the majesty of God's name is what we've looked at. The love expressed in God's name, the salvation expressed in God's name. Now the righteousness of God's name we've taken a look at. And now we're going to be looking at the protection of God's name. So there's a lot to be learned in the names of God. And obviously this isn't the first Sunday school lesson or lesson period that has gone over God's name. They're very instructive and very helpful for us. Do you have a particular name of God that you've rested in? There's the God that sees. There's the God that hears. There's the God that does. There's the God who loves. And at different times in your station of life, you may rest on a certain attribute that God is highlighting in his name. But he's there. Our Father. What's that? How does that impact you, Mark?
Impacts me that I know that I'm his, and that he watches over me. He has things in control that I don't need to worry about that. I just focus on him, that he has my best in mind, whatever it is.
Okay. We can cry, Abba, Father.
Right.
Now, and you don't need to answer this, Mark. You can if you choose to. Did you have a good relationship with your father?
Yes.
Okay. I am fine, and so did I. My dad and I got along well, basically because we had a ton of things in common. Not only what we enjoyed doing, but physically, we looked identical. One time, I got out of a car and his sister was visiting our house, and she thought I was him. So we had a lot in common. But what I've come to realize is this: not everyone had a great relationship with their father. And so when you say things like, what is an attribute you love of God? He's my father. Some people, that does not register. Because when they think of their father, they do not have pleasant thoughts. And I'm not talking about the dad who was strict. All right. Sometimes we didn't like the strictness of our fathers and so on. They just did not have a relationship with their dad. And either by abandonment, by abuse, or some other thing. And so when you talk about God as a father, we have to register or realize that doesn't register with some people. Not at all. And we can't become frustrated with that. We should cherish the fact that we had a relationship well with our father, and to the best of our ability, make sure that our children have a relationship with us that resembles that. Knowing how it has impacted you that when you think of God, you don't think of him as a father. You may think of him as other things, or you've come to grow to think of him as a father, but some people, that does not register at all. But all right, great. Father, any other attributes or things about God that register with you?
I would have to say counselor.
Counselor? Yeah, absolutely. I can remember bringing Daniel home from the hospital as if it were yesterday, thinking to myself, how in the world do you raise a kid? I mean, I can remember him sitting in the back seat. I don't think he was crying, but I knew he was behind me, and I thought, how are we going to do this? Had no clue. And with Terry and I, we had moved to New Concord. We had no family, none. We had the church family, which was very helpful, but it wasn't like we could. And Terry's mom was dead, and her dad basically disowned her. So it wasn't like she could call her mom and say, Mom, what do I do? She didn't have that. And my mom and dad were nowhere near. So it was a struggle. And so anyhow, some people struggle with that concept. All right, anybody else? God. Understanding, near. He's many things. Let's get into our lesson this morning. We're looking at the protection that God gives to us. The protection that God gives to us. In Psalm 91, 1 through 6 is what we're going to be looking at. So whether you have it on your phone or wherever, we're checking it out. He that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Why does God say that way? What's the shadow of the Almighty implying?
That no matter how high your place is, he's above you.
Okay, he's above you because that's how you get a shadow cast. What's another thing? Think of where these people dwell. Where do they dwell? They dwell in a secret place, but physically, where do they dwell? Pardon me? On earth. What's the temperature on earth where they dwell? Hot. Hot, hot. 123 degrees, 130 degrees, hot. You need shade. All right? That's not something, especially in Ohio in midwinter, we're not thinking of shade. We would love to see the what? We would love to see the sun. When we were in Israel in February, it was 68, 70 degrees. We went up this mountain and they told us cover up. And one gentleman did not heed it. And we were up on this, and I'm not talking Mount Everest. I'm talking maybe 6,000 feet, somewhere in there. And he did not cover up. And he came back. You know, you don't see it immediately. It's a couple hours after. He was fried. I mean, lobster red, like what you might see in July here. And they told him, cover up. So this shadow, this is a covering, a protective covering. He that dwelleth in a secret place of the Most High shall abide. God's protecting him. He's covering him over. He's providing relief. I will say of the Lord, he is my refuge and my fortress, my God in him will I trust. Surely he shall deliver thee from the snare of the fowler and from the noisome pestilence. He shall cover thee with his feathers, and under his wings shalt thou trust. His truth shall be thy shield and thy buckler. Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the arrow that flieth by day, nor the pestilence that walketh in darkness, nor for the destruction that wasteth at noonday. So what am I learning about God here? He's protecting us. He is looking out for us. Now, when I read something like that, and I see accidents of people who I love or maybe know, and I know they love the Lord. For example, it was a year and a half ago. A young man, part of the Jeromesville Fire Department, 20-some years old, of a lot of young people that I know, I would say a top-notch Christian, was riding his motorcycle and got killed. What goes through we're all parents here. What goes through a parent's mind? Too young. Yeah. And you're thinking, why not me? None of us are really that old here. I'm not implying that. But I think a natural response from a parent would be, I've lived a lot of life. This young person hasn't lived much of anything. And such a good influence in the community. What a light shining for God. Gone. And then I read a passage like Psalm 91, 1 through 6, that is talking about, not extensively or exclusively, God's what?
Protection.
His protection. And I don't see it.
What's God protecting you from?
Yeah, what is he protecting me from? Well, when I read this, in context of the psalm, you're one of the Israelites. What does it seem like he's protecting me from in context? The enemy. Okay.
Is this somebody out to deceive you?
Somebody out to deceive me? Is it spiritualized in your mind, or is it?
In my mind, it is. I don't feel like that it's an invading army. I feel like it's more of a spiritual protection than a physical protection.
Okay. Now, David is writing the psalm, I believe. Do you think that's what he's thinking? It's spiritual protection. You think?
Somebody's always out to get him.
So predominantly, would you say he's thinking physical or spiritual? He's thinking physical. His enemies are real. I mean, they're down the road, huddling up, thinking to themselves, conniving, how in the world are we going to get into that guy, Jerusalem, and take him down? And the guys over here are thinking the same thing, and the guys down the road are thinking the same thing. They're thinking mostly and mainly physical harm.
It's hard for me to relate to that because
Yes.
I've never lived that.
Exactly.
So, when I look at things like this, I tend to think of there's more people out to get me spiritually than there is physically.
Yes. And in America, that is absolutely true. But in the Koreas, in China, in Russia, in many other places of the world, is it the opposite. It isn't spiritual predominantly. It is physical predominantly. They are out to get them. Middle East. You bring a Bible into some countries, that's the last thing you're ever going to see because you're going down. So we have to be careful. We tend to spiritualize things and put them in that realm, which I don't think God is forbidding. But we need to remember, for a lot of people, what David was experiencing physically more than spiritually is their reality. They literally need to know this. Because I guarantee you right now, somebody is rotting away in some prison cell someplace in this world. And they need the spiritual help, right? But physically, they're being wore out. So God is, the whole point of this lesson is God's physical protection, God's protection for us. Now, we do have physical protection But for the most part, we don't see it. Because if he protected us and it didn't happen, then we didn't notice, right? So if I'm driving somewhere and I didn't see God cause this car to pull over for whatever reason, who would have ran that stop sign and T-boned me, I never know that he did it. Or something like that happened, unless it actually occurs to me, I never realized that he protected me. All right? But so predominantly in America, the threat we see is the unseen in the spiritual realm. But for these individuals, it was definitely in the physical. What one is easier to identify? If I'm doing this lesson, the protection of God's name, what one is easier to identify? The physical or the spiritual? Physical. And what do you think then is a caution for us where we don't see the protection mainly as the physical? We mainly see it in the spiritual. What might be a caution we need to exercise? Is that making sense? If my protection is mainly in the spiritual realm, which can I see? Discernment. What might I need to be cautious of as opposed to somebody in one of the Koreas or Russia or China where it's very physically apparent I have an adversary? Is that making sense?
Yeah, we're not seeing the spiritual attacks.
And so what could happen to us? We get lax. No, that's putting it. Yes.
Fall in a routine and you're just not paying attention.
Not paying attention, falling into routine because it's just like it's always there. It's just like many of us, when we open up the refrigerator, has there been ever a time in your life, honestly, when you opened up your refrigerator and expected to see nothing? Has there ever been a time in your life? There is always what? It may not be what you want, right? But there is always, in my refrigerator, except for maybe in college a couple times, nothing left in the fridge. But as a rule, we open up the fridge and it's there. There's something there. And we can become complacent. We just expect God to always be doing what? Taking care of us. And we can make huge assumptions and we can lose our gratitude, our appreciation for it. Right now, are you cold, hot, pretty comfortable? Comfortable. How many of you, and shame on me, did I thank the Lord for our heat? No, for our roof, for an enclosed building. We just what? When we come to church, we assume everything's going to be here. Everything to our desires, our comfort level. And when we become the slightest uncomfortable, and I'm not complaining, don't ever complain, we get complaints. All right? God is showing us we are taking care of, and many times the things that He does for us, we fail to recognize because they're just always there. Right? Okay. So we're looking at this psalm. Thou shalt not be afraid by the terror by night, nor the arrow that flieth by day. That's for real. How many in here stay up late at night thinking about any adversary taking over your your dwelling place. No. We automatically what? Assume we're what? We're safe. We're safe. And not only do we automatically assume we're safe physically, we assume we're safe spiritually. And we fail to recognize just now, do any of us have a perfect family? You can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm going to go on a limb and say no. None of us do. But could it be much, much worse? Yes. Every one of us in here have had the opportunity for our children to be exposed to God and to Christians and to Christ. Do you know how many people don't get that? Not at all. Could things be better here? Oh, absolutely, right? In my own life, absolutely. In my family's life, absolutely. But think of what has been given to me in lieu of what other people, there are dads sitting somewhere in the world today who have no hope, are looking at their child or children, no hope for them, wondering what in the world is this all about? Right? And you and I aren't sitting, now, not perfect, not implying it's perfect, but sitting here saying, all of our children have been exposed constantly. And even if I've been a bad example, there's another good example God has brought into their life to replace the bad example I may have been. In other words, it's just constant exposure. And God's done it. But it happens so regularly, we can become complacent and almost to this point that it becomes an expectation that God would do this. And we kind of lose our appreciation for the expectation. Well, God's supposed to do this. No, he's not supposed to do this. He's graciously doing this. So, and how many in here, honestly, outside of a tornado or a storm, have sought God for protection? How many of here have ever ran for their lives? Outside of my mom chasing me a few times when I was a kid. Yeah. Well, I take that back. You did not run from, my brothers and sisters and I did not run from my mom. That was going from murder to suicide. You did not do that. But truly, how many of us have run for our lives? None of us. We've never run for our lives. God has always protected us. What's that?
He had a couple of cows chasing him.
Oh, that's true.
I got chased by a bull once when I was a kid.
The only chasing I got done or by was my brothers and his older friends, because I was the neighborhood guinea pig because I was the youngest in the group.
You start drawing on it, and a couple times it was the neighbor's dogs.
But nobody, no human being, because of your beliefs, chased you. No. And so we sometimes can assume God's protection.
When I went on that mission trip to Russia, like, there's just something in the air where you were nervous. Like, no one chased us, but like, they were always careful, and there was just like this aura of like, you should be scared.
I don't.
People are scared. Like, those people live with, always someone's watching. So like
It-
what you're saying, those countries, those people feel it.
Yes. So it's not a spiritual thing. We're saying it's mainly spiritual. It's not spiritual for them. It's truly intimidation.
There was just this aura of like you should be scared.
Yeah. And even in Peru, which is not a communist country, it's the only thing I can when we went to Jerusalem, part of that is occupied. And you walk through different security. Everyone has a machine gun. When I forget what town we were going to visit, they stopped our bus. And they came on our bus, armed, and started asking questions. That is the most afraid I have been. And not even then, the guy told us what was going to happen and told us to keep our mouths shut. But if they answered a question, just tell them honestly the answer to their question. That was intimidation. And when you're that way, and like Aaron is saying, and like those people, that's not a one day on a vacation experience. That's their life, living underneath that. You are not praying, God, spiritually protect me. You are praying that, but you're also praying that God would what protect you? Physically protect you. And at any moment, they can walk in and take your kids. And you have nothing, or your spouse, or your dad, or your mom, just from underneath your nose. They're not mainly protecting for spiritual protection. They're praying for physical. And that's probably what David is praying in this psalm. Physical protection. All right, so we're learning God is my protection. Now, let's keep going on. Anybody have anything else to say about that? I tell you, traveling to another country opens your eyes.
There's a couple really good books that I've read. Maybe you all have read also, but one's called, I think it's called Heavenly Man, and it's about a Chinese man that becomes a missionary in his country, and it goes through all the struggles that he had gone through with being in prison constantly, and how it's kind of like how the angels unlocked all the doors for Peter,
Yeah.
and escaping, just walking out of the prisons in broad daylight. And there was another book too. I think it's called God's Smuggler.
Yeah.
That was such an awesome book.
Yeah.
And how there's moments where we don't know what the Lord is doing. We can't see what's happening, but God is making things so that you can go right through, right past a guard, or smuggling the books, the Bibles, where he had boxes of Bibles in his car, and like going through these different checkpoints where they look in the car and they didn't even see them.
Brother Sturt shared that one
Yeah.
time at a missions conference.
Yeah, that's who I was thinking of when he said that.
Yeah.
There were times where they should have got searched and they didn't.
Yeah, for some reason, the guard just, okay, go.
Yeah. And on the other side of the coin, those are all good examples of God's protection. When I was at Pensacola going through seminary, there was a gentleman there from China, and he was noticeably limped, looked like he had maybe been born with something. That wasn't the case. He had been beaten so bad that he had developed these deformities. And interesting enough, Pensacola's asked him, would you stay here and teach? We think you would be a good influence on people. And he said, no, my country needs me to be there. And I thought, wow, he was walking right back into the lion's den. And he was already physically deformed from his beatings. And he would not talk about it. He refused to draw attention to himself. Because we're all, it was visible how he walked and how he moved. We would have thought he was born with some deformities. They were all acquired deformities from the Chinese government. So, yeah, a lot going on there. All right, keep moving on. Psalm 91, again, verses 9 through 13, we're looking at God, our protection. Because thou hast made the Lord, which is my refuge, even the Most High, thy habitation, there shall no evil befall thee, neither shall any plague come nigh thy dwelling. All right. Is that totally true? Okay. So God's not making promises, complete promises here, just like some of the Proverbs. He's making generalized statements. As a rule, you can have this. Because once you start, I think sometimes we can confuse our kids, the kids here, well, Aaron has kids coming up. When we read like Proverbs and it makes it sound so absolute that this, if you do A, B's going to happen. Okay? We have to remember, we have to read that wisdom literature, which Psalms and Proverbs is part of, along with Ecclesiastes and Job. Because what happens in Ecclesiastes and Job as part of wisdom literature? Why is it essential you read all of them? Suffering. They're almost opposites.
A lot of aspects, that Psalms is full of a lot of, the Lord will protect you and, keep you from harm, things like that. And, the Proverbs is life is smoke.
Life is what?
Smoke. It's a vapor. It's here and it's gone. And, it's much more bad things happen.
Oh, you mean Ecclesiastes?
Yes, sorry.
Yes. Because Proverbs is full of these axioms. My son, if thou wilt do blah, 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 this will happen. And so you teach that proverb and you don't teach Ecclesiastes and you don't teach Job. Your son or daughter Mom and Dad said X, Y, Z or ABC, X, Y, Z happens. Don't get the whole picture. I did ABC and Dad, X, Y, Z didn't happen.
I have a hard time, honestly, talking about God's protection because, you talk about, people come and they talk about, I had all these Bibles in the car, I should have never gone in Saudi Arabia, but they never even looked. What about the guy who got caught?
Right.
Who had the same motives? And
Yeah.
ended up in prison. So what? God just forgot about him? All these things are for a reason, and I don't want to.
Right.
But it's a very, very difficult subject to talk to people about, especially when a loved one of theirs has came to harm. The young man that got in a motorcycle accident. Is anybody, looking at his parents and talking about God's protection? It's a difficult thing to discuss.
It is. And in some respects, some pastors, and at times even myself, we paint such a picture and we can be misleading, not maybe intentionally, by saying things so absolutely when they're not. And the Bible doesn't paint these absolute pictures other than salvation, knowing God and those absolutes, but it paints a very balanced picture of human life. You have Job and you have David. You have other people that it's gone very well, and you have other people. The apostles, when you think of the apostles' life after Christ, that did not go well. Read Paul's testimony. It did not go well. He's not complaining Where's all this protection from Psalms? He's just assuming it's coming. And he's not assuming that's the protection God meant for me. Paul is never praying for somebody's broken arms. He's never praying for somebody's broken back. He's never praying for their pneumonia. He's never praying for any of that. Because he's understanding the temporariness of our physical being. And he's totally after the spiritual. Whereas it seems Psalms is a lot about our physical being. And if I'm only a Psalm Proverbs reader, I can become distorted in what God's trying to communicate to us. Because, especially if I just sit down and read Proverbs to my child and do not balance it off with Ecclesiastes and Job, my children can be under the impression, what can go wrong in my life if I do this? Nothing. And then they get older, they do that, and lots of things go wrong. And then who do they begin to question? God. You said this. You said this, Dad. Come on, Dad, you told me this. Is God not real? Or am I doing, if that's how God's going to act, he's supposed to be my protector and this, that, and the other thing, and look what happened to me. I trust God, and these things, how can you say that with a straight face, Dad? The Bible never intended that, because you read it and it's balanced. You find Job in your wisdom literature. Here's a guy that did how much right?
He was a righteous person.
He was a righteous person. As much as that person can be, or any human can be, to be called that, he was called that. And initially, what was going right in his life? Everything. Then what happened? Nothing went right.
He lost everything.
He lost everything.
He lost everything. He lost family as well.
Yes.
You know, most of it was wealth is what he lost. His family, obviously, I think would have been the hardest to.
Yes. And what does his wife say?
Curse God and die.
Curse God and die. Okay?
But, you know, she lost everything too.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think we sell her short.
Well,
Because how many of what
sometimes we sell her short and we give way too much credit to Job. Because, the patience of Job. Read Job very carefully.
she lost everything too.
Yeah.
We'd all like to be in the other line, but until you cross that bridge,
You don't know.
you don't know.
You don't know. She just expressed it quickly. It took Job a couple of whatevers, because we don't know what the time frame was. Was it a year, a couple of years? But I'm telling you, some of the verses people think are complimenting Job are wrong. He is hammering God and making him, he's what? The guy is what? He's confused. He's confused. He doesn't know what's going on. And he's not getting any help from his friends. His friends keep telling him what?
You said
Yeah.
something. What are you hiding?
Get it on the table, Job, so you can get over this stuff. And there's nothing to put on the table. And, sometimes that can be us, right? When things are going, what maybe our first thought is, what did I do to deserve this, God? And the answer is, you didn't do anything. And it's so hard for them, we accept it, then it's so hard for other people to accept it. What did this guy do that he was born blind? In the Gospels, right? Did he sin, or did his mom and dad sin? And Jesus' answer is, neither one of them sinned.
I never got the how did he sin. He was born blind. Did he sin?
But is that now?
Born blind. I don't think he had a chance to do much. He had bad thoughts in the world.
Yeah.
Is that what it was?
But Bob, that's how ridiculous we can become, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, he kicked her too hard. But that's how ridiculous we can become. Now, God's just trying to teach us some things. And so very early on in my Christianity, I was an absolutist. I loved absolute things. It was either hot or cold. It was either on or off. It made life easier, right? To process. Then you get older and you find out what? It don't work that way at all. And so but that's why people call this book wisdom literature. Wisdom. You're supposed to grow in it. And your life will teach you that. And it's unfortunate that you start gaining your wisdom as life starts wrapping up. And so that's why dads and granddads are supposed to take their children and grandchildren aside and start talking to them. Now, son, it's going to seem that life works this way. But I'm going to tell you right now, it's not what it appears to be. Hopefully, they'll listen, but we know, how much did we listen to when we were 19 and 20 to our parents talking? Some went in, but most of it, doop. So we're patient. We've told them. And eventually, did you ever say to yourself, oh my dad was right? You did. And there goes, so they're again having to be careful with making those examples, because a lot of, especially kids today, do you know how many kids down at the school that one day, how many in this room live with your dad? And there's probably 30-some kids at Hillsdale School, small town USA. Less than half of those kids, a room of 30, 35, maybe 40, had a dad at their house.
When you were talking about that, and you know the relationship I had with my dad, it's a whole lot more prevalent today with young people than it was in my generation.
Yeah.
It was there, but today I imagine somebody relating to God as Father and having this warm image is
Non-existent.
yeah. It's not. I don't believe it's non-existent. There are good dads out there, but it is much more common than it's ever been, and probably more so in America than most other places in the world.
I can't even think, growing up, of one of my friends that did not have their dad at their home. I can't. I rack my brain. I lived in a small town. I lived on this one street. I can literally go down the street on one side and come back the street the other side and name all my friends, and go over to the next street over, and go through I came from a small school. I can think of every single one of my friends, and I cannot think for the life of me one person who didn't have their dad. I just can't. But anyhow, so the Lord our protector. So we need to be some of these verses, and thank God we're not doing anything wrong. We think of a lot of these protection verses in the spiritual sense, and I don't think we're doing any injustice to them. But we have to remember, a lot of our brothers and sisters in Christ, they're not thinking of them spiritually sense. They're thinking it truly in the physical. They're literally thinking what David was probably thinking of, this physical protection. But in either case, God is our what? He's our protector. And we know this as parents. Any dad worth his weight in salt would do what he can to protect his kids. He will. I'm not talking about the errant dads. I'm talking about a dad who has somewhat of a heart. He is going to protect his kids. And where do we get that from? We get it from God, because He protects. All right. Next week, let's see, give a heads up. What we're looking at. We're looking at we're looking at a different topic. Life-changing faith. So we're leaving the names of God and going to life-changing faith. Mike Williams, could you close our time with a word of prayer?
Lord, again, we thank you for this time we got to hear about your word. Ask, Lord, to bless the pastor for that. And we embed a lot of this in our hearts. We pray, Lord, for services to come that you will challenge hearts. And Lord, for those that we have in our minds as far as salvation, may we continue to encourage and to teach the lost, Lord. Again, thank you for your love in Jesus' name.
Amen.